O God, help us be instruments of thy peace. Where hate rules, let us bring love. Where sorrow, joy. Let us strive more to comfort others than to be comforted, to understand others than to be understood, to love others than to be loved. For it is in giving that we receive, and in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are raised to eternal life. So we come into this sanctuary of memory and hope, because even though we sit in the presence of a great loss and are saddened by what we face, we are nevertheless assured that there is a spirit alive in the world over which death has no dominion, a light which no darkness can extinguish. We gather this afternoon because one we love and cherish and respect has died, and so it is our time to mourn the death and to celebrate the life of Theodore Vestal. We are gathered here and online, family and friends, to pay tribute to his spirit and to give thanks for the many gifts of life which, because of him, we have received. We gather also in the hope that in the time of his death, he might strengthen our hold on life. So today is a time of mourning, but it's also a time of laughing. It's a time of grief and a time of sharing, a time of weeping, and a time to smile and to remember, a time to heal and a time to give thanks, and a time to embrace old friends, and a time to let go of past sorrows. Let us pray. God of life's adventure, we are surrounded on every side by a multitude of wonders. No corner of this great earth, which is our home, is without its own special miracles of sight and sound. In Africa, the Americas, India, and everywhere, there is a divinity in the world in all its varied manifestations and disguises. It's visible in the daily witness of nature's unfailing order and providence, and in the mysterious depths of our own being, in the call of the heart's adventure. In those countless affirmations when our openness to life confirms the very meaning of life in happiness and joy. And yet the essence of life's meanings remain a great and powerful mystery to us. The wherefores, the whys, the hows. And what we do not know, we're driven to find out. What we do not understand, we're inspired to search for and comprehend. And so we come to this place in thanksgiving and gratitude, to sing our praise of life in all its complexities, in all its uncertainties, and to confirm those things which he whom we honor, honored with his mind, his heart, and his spirit. Amen.
Fremd bin ich eingezogen, fremd zieh ich wieder aus. Der Mai war mir gewogen mit manchem Blumenstrauß. Das Mädchen sprach von Liebe, die Mutter gar von ihr. Das Mädchen sprach von Liebe, die Mutter gar von ihr. Nun ist die Welt so trübe, der Weg gehüllt in Schnee. Nun ist die Welt so trübe, der Weg gehüllt in Schnee. Ich kann zu meiner Reise nicht wählen den Weg mir weiten in diese Dunkelheit. Es zieht ein Mondenschatten als mein Gefährte mit. Es zieht ein Mondenschatten als mein Gefährte mit. Und auf den weißen Matten such ich des Wildes Tritt. Und auf den weißen Matten such ich des Wildes Tritt. Was soll ich länger weilen, dass man mich triebt hinaus? Lass ihre Hunde heulen vor ihres Herren Haus. Die Liebe liebt das Wandern, Gott hat sie so gemacht. Von einem zu dem anderen, Gott hat sie so gemacht. Die Liebe liebt das Wandern, ich liebe gute Nacht. Von einem zu dem anderen, fein Liebchen, gute Nacht. Dich in Traum nicht stören, verschont und deine Ruhe. Sollst meinen Tritt nicht hören, sagt die Türe zu. Schreibt ihm vorübergehen aus Tor dir gute Nacht, damit du mögest sehen, an dich hab ich gedacht. Schreib ihm vorübergehen aus Tor die gute Nacht, damit du mögest sehen, an dich hab ich gedacht, an dich hab ich gedacht.
Our first reading comes from the Christian scriptures from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 35 through 40, where Jesus says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit." And then the righteous answered him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothing and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And he replied, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you do for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And our second reading is an excerpt from a eulogy given for President John F. Kennedy by Senator Jacob Javits, who wrote in December of 1963. Words cannot describe how the American people felt when they lost their president. Not until the vacuum of disbelief was filled with the horror of comprehension did any of us realize how much we identified ourselves with the president, this intellectual, vigorous young man. And he would have been if he were 80, expressing the very essence of the youthfulness of our nation. As a nation, we have lost a president who understood the institution of the presidency, glorified in its overwhelming responsibilities, and discharged his duty with dash and joy, which were an inspiration to the youth of our nation. And one of those youth in his 20s when Kennedy was running for office, and early 30s as he was president, was our dear Ted Vestal, very inspired by President Kennedy. And one other world leader in the same year of 1963, who also was someone who Ted knew personally and who inspired him. This comes from an excerpt from a speech to the United Nations from the Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. Until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently discredited and abandoned, until there are no longer first-class and second-class citizens of any nation, until the color of a man's skin is of no more significance than the color of his eyes, until the basic human rights are equally guaranteed to all without regard to race, until that day, the dream of lasting peace and world citizenship and the rule of international morality will remain but a fleeting illusion to be pursued but never attained. And until the ignoble and unhappy regimes that hold our brothers in Angola, in Mozambique, and South Africa in subhuman bondage have been toppled and destroyed, until bigotry and prejudice and malice and inhumane self-interest have been replaced by understanding and tolerance and goodwill, until all Africans stand and speak as free beings, equal in the eyes of all men as they are in the eyes of heaven. Until that day, the African continent will not know peace. We Africans will fight if necessary, and we know that we shall win, as we are confident in the victory of good over evil.
Du bist der Friede, du bist von Himmel mir beschieden, dass du mich liebst, macht mich verwehrt, dein Blick hat mich von mir verklärt, du habst mich liebend über mich, mein guter Geist, mein besseres Ich. Du meine Seele, du mein Herz, du meine Wohnung, du mein Schmerz, du meine Welt, in der ich lebe.
Edward to come forward. I want to greet Pat. Pat couldn't be with us in person in the house of the sanctuary, but she's with us online. And so, Pat, I want to say hello to you. Susan, her daughter, is with her. So you all are very much present with us in this space and in this ceremony today. And we're so glad that you could be with us in this time.
Thank you, Reverend Lavenhar. And I'd like to say thank you to the musicians. Excuse me. These are beautiful and complex pieces that I suddenly had childhood memories of my father singing. I hadn't heard in years. Well, I was going to try not to tear up here, but so back to my speech. I want to thank you all for coming here today, and to our friends on streaming as well, our Taiwan family, Fei Chung Xie, Indian friends, Vanakkam Dhanyavad, our Ethiopian friends, Amasegan Elahu, hope I said that right. And thank you all for being here, present today. It's a lovely service, lovely church. Thank you. So my father, Theodore Merrill Vestal, was mere weeks away from his 90th birthday when he passed away. During those 90 years, he was many things to many people, but above all, he continually exhibited characteristics of the highest order. Dad positively touched the lives of many people, all of you here today, from his immediate family to his extended family and his colleagues at universities, from countless college students to the Ethiopians seeking asylum, to his many friends, those in Tulsa and further afield. He was a loving father, he was a loving husband to mother, and a loving grandfather to his grandchildren. And he was also the favorite uncle to his nieces and nephews. But to me, it was simply Dad. Dad was not only my father, but in his later years, he was my best friend. From the earliest days of fatherhood, Dad regaled his children and later his grandchildren with bedtime stories featuring the famous cowboy movie star, Tom Mix. Some of the younger folks probably never heard of Tom Mix, but the older folks would. And Tom Mix's Wonder Horse, Tony. Dad even worked into the stories his childhood friends, one of whom I had the pleasure of speaking to just recently and who unfortunately could not be here today, but I hope he's on streaming, Raymond Judd. My father and Raymond had been best friends since early childhood, since their days in grade school. They attended the Bryant School together in Sherman, Texas, and they not only attended each other's weddings, but they were the best man in each other's weddings. Dad stayed close with as many friends like Raymond over his lifetime, always sending Christmas cards to people, even when it was no longer in vogue, phoning them on occasion, dropping in if possible, and even keeping up with them on Facebook. Until his final days, Dad would meet with his friends at a cafe nearby here. I was happy to accompany Dad to meet his Friday morning group. And his friend Chuck Baber when I was in town. And Dad continued to sing well into his later years, encouraged and buoyed by his musical friends like Dolores Duke. In fact, they practiced the Winter Rising music. Dad in his younger days was an Eagle Scout. His father was a Scoutmaster, and together they pushed me into earning my Eagle Scout badge. Although in modern day that has diminished, back in Dad's day it was a very important thing. I'm thankful for learning from them what it means to follow the Scout motto, be prepared. Be prepared for what, you might ask? Well, pretty much anything. It was years later that I came to appreciate that a senior scout leader back in Sherman, Texas, was a survivor of the infamous Bataan Death March in World War II. His legacy instilled in his leadership in scouting, and that inextricably linked me to Troop 2 in Sherman, Texas, all these years. My dad had an affinity for the rule of law, the U.S. Constitution, the Supreme Court, and civil rights, not simply as a soundbite, as so often is used in modern day, but as a passion. And I dare say he carried with him the true sense of American freedom, the freedom sought by the founders in 1776, the inalienable rights enshrined in the Constitution. He loved teaching these subjects, and his passions are reflected in the many students who expressed their appreciation to him for leading them onward in their educational goals and careers, even years after their college graduations. An example occurred even last year. A student of Dad's from 30 years ago came by just last year and took him to lunch to thank him for having been an inspiration to her and launching her highly successful career. And we had many such examples like this over the years. Dad carried with him the optimism of the early 1960s, those positive and almost quaint times of square dancing, Peter, Paul, and Mary. People used to trust in government institutions and had positive outlooks. Almost incredibly, Dad was there at the Martin Luther King speech presented from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when he had the famous I Have a Dream speech. And Dad followed closely John F. Kennedy, JFK, as the Reverend noted. It was JFK himself who visualized the Peace Corps that Dad so prominently had a part of. JFK created the Peace Corps and put his brother-in-law in charge of it, a man named Sergeant Shriver. And it was the Peace Corps that the Peace Corps that grabbed Dad's attention and attracted to him into an international setting without choice as to where he was to be posted. And the decision of Ethiopia came to affect Dad in profound ways throughout his life. During the past 25 years or so, I've lived mostly overseas or in Hawaii, with a lot of time in Middle East and the stands in Central Asia. And during this time being away, it was difficult to visit my parents, my mom and dad. But we as a family made great effort to meet together once per year during the summer. And on these summer trips, Dad delighted every year to spend time with his children and grandchildren. He would explore with us. He would go hiking with us, attending concerts. Dad even was boogie boarding on the waves in Hawaii when he was about 70 years old. And when I traveled in the U.S., I made it a point to visit with my mom and dad, sometimes only for a couple of days, with me enduring terminal jet lag. But Dad would always insist on picking me up at the airport or taking me back to the airport, even if it was 4 a.m. Almost paradoxically, I became closer to my dad during these years. It's true, that absence does make the heart grow fonder. In recent years, Dad and I often discussed how the country has changed, yet remains viable largely in light of its constitutional underpinnings. Dad was rather shocked at the state of the modern U.S. Supreme Court, which was a topic he taught on for years and spoke on and wrote articles and books. He was saddened to see that it was changed from a shining beacon of hope and democracy to something of a shell of its former self, and he often questioned how that could be restored. I hope he'll see that one day. I'm very pleased that Dad and I in the past several years made up for time lost, doing things together and attending events together that we missed out on long ago. There was nothing better, than watching a Tulsa Drillers baseball game with Dad at the local stadium. He was always ready for a hot dog and a beer. I enjoyed accompanying Dad to operas, as did our family at the Santa Fe Opera and here. And even here in Tulsa, the first post-COVID opera Dad attended with Dolores and me was at the ballpark. They had the first opera at the ballpark to keep distances. There was another time when I happened to be in Tulsa and heavy metal rock singer Bob Seger was playing at the new BOK Center. And I said, I want to go. And Dad insisted on going with me, and he went with me. To this day, I wonder if he was really pulling my leg when he thought we were going to go see Pete Seeger, who is a well-known folk singer, clarinet player, and social activist. So Dad and I also binge watched a Korean TV drama series called Squid Games. And we climbed aboard a World War II bomber visiting Tulsa, and he happily maneuvered his way through it as if he was an agile 19-year-old. Dad revealed his Hemingway-esque inner self when he helped me to fill in gaps in his writing of his Peace Corps memoirs, which I was thrilled to do. For example, he asked, how does one hand crank a Land Rover to get the engine started as the river level is rising? He wanted to know about crocodile hunting, rifles, and big game cartridges, piloting small planes in the bush to avoid damaging the propeller. I had a wonderful time with Dad on his writings of these things. I suggested edits, and I came to understand he had an interest in these things I never knew he did. It seems like Dad and I should have been way long ago sharing a gin and tonic on the edge of Ngorongoro crater in Tanganyika in the early 60s. In the past several years, we knew that Dad and Mom were getting along in years, and he also knew that I found a home in Singapore and wanted to continue to live there. He insisted I remain in Singapore, but I knew I needed to return to the USA to be near them. Thank goodness I moved fairly near here, near Dallas, in this past January in 2023. And about every 2 weeks, I drove up here to visit Mom and Dad. The 4-hour drive, a breeze compared to crossing the planet. And I would pull into the driveway, and there'd be Dad in the window working on his computer. And he would always give me a cheery smile. He had that happy countenance about him always. I always felt so welcome, yet privileged to be there with him. I was privileged to visit with Dad about 7 times, I think it was, this year. And they were among the happiest times for us both. And it was about 2 days before I was to drive up to Tulsa again, and I received that fateful phone call that he was gone. I wonder if somehow he knew the end was near, yet he somehow held on until I knew he was settling in nearby. I'm nearing the end. Dad had a Buddha side to him, and my sister Suzanne helped me articulate this. Dad was the definition of calm, marked by an unruffled repose or quietude, a serene smile despite the surrounding chaos. He always seemed to rise above the everyday fray. He possessed a holistic level of human consciousness, behaving and relating as ends rather than means to himself, to his family, to human beings in general, even to other species. He loved his dogs, his previous cat, horses, to nature and to the cosmos. I picture Dad even now. I picture him out for a run on a grassy hill, or perhaps walking a little dog along the same grassy hill, admiring the view, that friendly nod, that unruffled repose, and that contented smile. We were all touched by Dad's presence, and we're all better because of that. I invite each of you to keep Dad alive in your hearts. Now it's our turn to go out, to go out and live a life to the fullest and keep Dad's legacy alive.
And now I'd like to invite his granddaughter, Jules Thompson, to come forward and share some reflections about her grandfather. Come on forward. And she will be followed by a friend from Ethiopia, Mel.
Thank you, Marlon. Thank you so much, Edward. That was, wow, incredibly good. Probably the best eulogy I've ever heard, actually. Thank you all for coming. had a whole preamble I was going to say, and now I've forgotten what it was, but anyway, I'll just go on with my speech. I was going to thank the musicians. That's what it was. Thank you so much. That was an incredible, both of those performances were so evocative, and Granddad would have loved it so much. And indeed sung those very often too. So I first met Granddad, Ted Vestal, for the first time at the Waverley rail station in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is where I was born. And unfortunately, I don't remember the meeting because I was only a few weeks old. But according to Granddad, I smiled immediately when I saw him, and I have no trouble believing that because that's always been the perfect encapsulation of our relationship. He was the best grandfather anyone could ask for. Now I'm tearing up. And I was always so happy to see him. He put up with a lot for me as a child, including frequent imprisonment under the living room piano when we played cops and robbers. We also pioneered computer games together, including a primitive MS-DOS game called Tank Wars, in which I frequently blew him up. Grandma would ask how the game went, and Granddad would reply, somewhat indignantly, "She nuked me." So that was a fun pastime. The word granddad almost doesn't sum up what he was to me. He was really a father figure as well as a grandfather. He was so important in my life, and especially during the time we all lived in Tulsa from when I was about 11 to 18 years old. And he was just such a wonderful role model, an exemplar of kindness and learning. Having dinner with my grandparents on the weekend was the highlight of my week, and it's still one of my most nostalgic, mental, happy places. Granddad engendered a love of nature in his children and grandchildren. Some of the most cherished memories with him are from the natural world, on trails in Oklahoma, New Mexico, Vermont, and Maine, and probably others I'm forgetting, including a particular canoe excursion where we crashed spectacularly into the bank. The best part of this story was Granddad's sanguine insistence up until the end that, no, sweetie, we're not going to crash. And then we did. He was always very optimistic. The arts were very important in his life, obviously, including an early stage career playing Don Quixote in his local Finley Playhouse in Sherman, where his daughter, my mother, Suzanne, assisted behind the scenes. And later he sung in many of Tulsa Opera's choruses. Our family was very fortunate to be invited to a lot of free dress rehearsals. And perhaps my fondest sensory memory is, like Edward, hearing him sing scales and verses of song by the grand piano, which was the same piano I imprisoned him under. He particularly liked to sing Home on the Range, The Royal Mile, and I Got Plenty of Nothing from Porgy and Bess. They were definitely the particular favorites, at least during my time. And one of his mottos was that the key to happiness is to sing every day, and I so agree with that. He had a really strong sense of morality, which he handed down to all of us. From a relatively early age, I recall hearing him on the phone, testifying as an expert witness for Ethiopian asylum seekers fleeing the country's authoritarian regime. And that was probably the first time I realized, hey, this guy is kind of a big deal. It's really because of Granddad's work with the Peace Corps and other international aid organizations that the Vestal family is so internationally minded. And it's so difficult to overstate the impact of this. The fact that Charles, Edward, and my mother, Suzanne, saw so much of the world at an early age obviously affected their outlook on life. And I think it expanded their understanding and compassion for humanity as a whole. Literally all of them would go on to marry international partners, which I'm not sure what that says about pickings in the US, but it does demonstrate the ongoing legacy of growing up in different cultures. And that legacy is even more remarkable when you consider that Granddad himself was raised in a small town in Texas with no expectation that he would become a globetrotter, but his desire to expand horizons, both geographically and intellectually, is something that I see very plainly in his children and grandchildren. I recently learned that one of my high school friends decided to do her study abroad in Cameroon after talking to him. I don't think Granddad... I'm going to get emotional again. I don't think Granddad and I ever had a conversation on the phone where he didn't end by telling me how proud he was of me. I wish that everyone could have a supportive family member like Ted Vestal in their life. The world would be a much better place if we all did. And as I would say to him often in reply, I'm proud of you too, Granddad.
Mel, please come forward and share your reflections as well. Thank you for being here on behalf of the family.
Oh, thank you very much. First off, I wanted to say thank you to this beautiful song that I was really familiar because I'm not going to lie to you, I went to school in Germany. So das war eine gute Song. Das 1828 was the song. Almost 200 years old, and we're still having a beautiful time. Ich bedanke mich. Das war ganz gut. And for Ted Vestal, I can't say words that can describe who he is to a lot of Ethiopians and to my family, and particularly my son, who worked with him very closely, because my son happens to be a historian also. So before I get to my story, I was sent a message by the prince. So since I'm an ordinary guy and the prince is a prince, I'm going to read his message first. He put it on his website. It's called crowncouncilofethiopia.org. If you guys are interested, you can go look it up. Crown Council of Ethiopia. Theodore Vestal, 1933-2023. Theodore M. Vestal passed away on June 7th at the age of 89. A former political science professor at Oklahoma State University, Vestal's lifelong interest in Ethiopia began in 1963 when he served as an associate director of Peace Corps in Addis Ababa. During a long, storied academic career, Vestal wrote several influential books, including Ethiopia, a post-Cold War Africa, State, 1999, The Line of Judah, and the New World, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, and the shaping of American attitude towards Africa in 2011. And he's got a book now that we are trying to get published. It's sitting at Tzahai Publishing, and I will ask everybody to call Tzahai Publishing and tell them to get going on it. The book it will be ready and should be out hopefully soon. In January 2018, in recognition of his long career in Ethiopia, says the prince, studies, and the service of Ethiopia, Vestal received the rank of the Knight of Grand Cross of the Order of Ethiopia. Vestal was also a recipient of the Crown Council's medal honoring the victory of Adwa and the victory of Gondar. Upon hearing Vestal's death, Prince Ermias called Vestal a good man, a loyal and staunch friend of Ethiopia. It was a desire and commitment until the end of his life to see a peaceful Ethiopia. Vestal is one of the many international visitors to Ethiopia who made it a second home and a lifelong love. That's the prince. And I will add my own recollection as follows. I met Ted Vestal in person in 2010. My son, Adam Tawahade, who is also a historian, became a close friend to Ted. Adam and I embarked on a project to document Point 4. Later, the name was changed to USAID, used to be called Point 4, contribution to Ethiopian educational system. We also went to record the contribution of Peace Corps to Ethiopians' youth education. Dr. Clyde Kindle, a former president of the Ethiopian Agricultural College, and Dr. Ted Vestal, former deputy director of Peace Corps in Ethiopia and Africa, were the two most important historical American figures who made the lion's share of the contribution to the Ethiopian people. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all that participated in the Point 4, Peace Corps, and OSU. Ethiopia is now a better place. A lot of you might think it's not, but Ethiopia is now a better place. Ted Vestal was always where Adam and I, my son, came back to ensure that our research was accurate, factual. Point 4 documentary was successfully shown in films and will be seen, soon released, hopefully, on Netflix. Ted helped countless Ethiopian refugees since the beginning of the chaotic mayhem in Ethiopia in 1974. In 2024, we're going to remember 50 years of chaos in Ethiopia. I will never despair because Ted told me a great nation like Ethiopia will be tested and tested well. But ultimately, it will pass all the hardships. I have no choice but to believe Ted Vestal. I only listen to my own Father in heaven or Ted Vestal. I have no reason to believe that Ethiopia will fail. I also pray for this beautiful land that we call USA that gave 2 million Ethiopians a new home and hope. I pray that God keeps chaos and hatred far away from the USA and keeps it safe for our children and future generations of refugees. I'm sad about losing my mentor, and Pat, his wife, lovely artist, a good friend, who always worked as his telephone operator. Pat, you're beautiful inside out, and I have a message for you from Ted. You need to keep on painting till we meet again in heaven. I thank God, the God of the heavens, who takes one and gives 3 instead. Nice to meet Suzanne, Charles, and Edward for the first time, and their families. God bless Ted Vestal, God bless Ethiopia, and God bless USA.
Someone might ask, how did Ted Vestal become someone with such a devotion to his country, to his family, to the world, and to his fellow human beings? It might help to know that his father dropped out of high school to serve this country in World War I, the war to end all wars. And then his older brother, Hugh, served in the Pacific in World War II. Growing up, Ted sang in the choir in the Baptist church in Sherman, Texas. He played softball, he was a lifeguard, and as we heard, an Eagle Scout. He grew up in a Norman Rockwell America, in an all-white, segregated world. His father was a postman. Ted would go on to be in person to hear John Lewis and Martin Luther King Jr. and other great black leaders at the March on Washington. When John F. Kennedy pitched the idea that we could win hearts and minds without the tip of a rifle by digging wells and feeding people and providing technology, so societies could emerge out of the third world status and become allies that way instead of through military intervention, Ted knew that he wanted to be a part of it. His road there took him first through art school as a singer at the University of North Texas, where he met Pat, who was studying painting. She was the president of her class, and Ted saw her standing with a group of students one day, and he introduced himself, and he said he never let go. And he didn't for over 66 years of marriage. They were married back in Dallas in the summer of 1956 in the SMU chapel. By then, Ted was finishing law school at Yale. Pat said that their honeymoon was the drive to California so Ted could earn his PhD at Stanford. Suzanne was born in 1958 in Palo Alto, California. And then Ted took his first job as a political science professor back at SMU in Dallas. And then Edward was born there in Dallas. And later they moved back to California, to Sacramento, so that Ted could work in the University of California system. And it was while there that Ted decided to take the job with the Peace Corps. They moved to Washington, D.C. for training, and Pat stopped on her way back here in Tulsa to be with family while she was 9 months pregnant. And it was here that she had Charles, and Ted flew back from Washington, D.C. to attend the birth. Now, after 1 year in Washington, Ted took the family of 5 to Ethiopia to become the associate director of the Peace Corps there. And his job was to administer Peace Corps volunteers within Ethiopia. Well, Ted learned the language using his reel-to-reel tape recorder. And the family car, while in Africa, was an English Land Rover, because you needed a 4x4 car in order to get around the roads. And Suzanne says that she and her dad spent more time on horseback as the main means of transportation